Thank you, colleagues and friends. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining in the CFPR seminar. And today we have with us Associate Professor Kristina GÖRANSSON with the School of Social Work at Lund University, Sweden. It's, I think, 8 a.m. for her at her site, so we're really glad that she agrees to give a talk at this time. Okay, and I'm Ling Tang from Department of Japanese Studies at NUS, and also social culture anthropologies like Kristina. So Kristina is, those of you who are interested in looking at intergenerational relations of families in Singapore will probably know her work, The Biding Tide, Chinese Intergenerational Relations in Modern Singapore, that was published with University of Hawaii Press. And she has been, Singapore has been her fieldwork, but I know that recently she has new projects that's looking at parenting with young children and education in urban East Asia. So it's really, I'm really glad that she is able to make a presentation out of her recent work today. And the title is Ambiguous, Aspirations, Ethnographic Perspectives on Parenting and Young Children's Education in Urban East Asia. Let's welcome Kristina.
Thank you so much, Ling, and thank you all for coming. It's early on my side, but I know it's Friday afternoon on your side, and normally on Friday afternoons we want to get home quickly. So glad to see so many of you here, and I'm really happy to be able to present. We have found new ways of presenting during COVID times. I haven't been to Singapore now for 2 years. I will tell you a bit more about my field work there and so on, but glad to be invited here. So let's see now, I will try to speak for about 40 minutes, and then we will have some time for questions. So let me tell you a little bit about this project. No? There. So I am running a project. It's a larger ethnographic study of parenting strategies around young children's education in urban East Asia, and it's funded by a Swedish funding agency called Riksbankens Jubileumsfond. And the overall aim of this project is to study shifting norms that shape overall parenting strategies around young children's education in urban East Asia, and we look particularly at how these practices are entangled with gender, class, generation, and also notions of population quality or human capital. And we are doing the fieldwork in Beijing, Seoul, and Singapore. So it's in these 3 cities. I can also mention that this project, it was supposed to run over 3 years. We have got some extension because of COVID, and I would say that we are somewhere on the second half of the project. We are more than halfway. We have some publications in the pipeline. One is out, but we are not really done. So I really look forward to any comments, suggestions on how to go about this very diverse and rich data set that we have. Apart from myself, I have some colleagues in the project. It's Lisa Eklund from Lund University. She's a sociologist specializing in China. So she is the one doing the fieldwork in Beijing. Then we have Yoonhee Kang from Seoul National University. Some of you might know her. I think she has been at NTU, if I'm not wrong. She is doing the fieldwork in Seoul. And we also have a research assistant who is also a PhD student here at Lund University, Yeonjin Kim. And she is primarily assisting my colleague in Seoul, Yoonhee Kang. And myself, as Ling said, I am specializing in Singapore, so I am the one conducting the fieldwork in Singapore. So we are specializing in one area each, so to speak. Now, so why did we want to study parenting and young children's education in urban East Asia? There are many reasons, but most importantly, I would say that East Asia in general, and Singapore, South Korea, and China in particular, has established reputation as top performers in international student assessments, tests, and ranking, which is usually thought to be the result of a successful and competitive education system, as well as a distinct parenting culture, which prioritizes school results above all. On top of that, anxieties around preparing one's children for the future drive parents to devote substantial resources, time, and energy in their children's upbringing, and parental involvement is increasingly taken for granted. Another important reason for us to do these studies to speak against simplistic interpretations of the intensification of parenting in East Asia and beyond. So by drawing on ethnographic data, we hope to explore the emotional and moral dimensions of parents' educational work, how they cope with complex and sometimes contradictory demands in raising their young children. What sacrifices do they do? How do they negotiate different desires and so on? Now, so our project, of course, specifically explores these issues in Singapore, Beijing, and Seoul, but I think that this kind of knowledge is significant also in a global context where the concern for population quality is increasing. So ultimately, you can say that the project is concerned with shifting notions of parenting, care, childhood, and the relationship between family life and broader social trends. So a little bit about the field work and how we have gone about it, and what kind of sample we have. We are focusing only on parents of pre and primary school age children. That's quite important to point out. And why we do that is that because this particular group of parents with rather young children, everywhere, not only in Asia, they are increasingly expected to attend to the young children's cognitive development and learning. And this kind of pressure is also reinforced by the growing influence of neuroscience and the widespread claim that early childhood is the most critical period of cognitive development. Early childhood is also often considered to be crucial in the formation of affective bonds between parents and children, and to become a sort of important foundation for children's future learning and education. And at least when it comes to Singapore, there are also previous research that indicates that parental involvement in children's education is most intense during this particular period up until the age of 12, as compared to parents with older children. And I think our data only supports that previous research. Yes, that's a little bit about why we focus on this group of parents. So we have conducted fieldwork in the cities of Beijing, Seoul, and Singapore. And because we are actually interested, when you talk about the intensification of parenting, normally it's a middle class group of parents that you would be interested in, but we were interested in the diversity of parental involvement. So we included parents of different socioeconomic and educational backgrounds to allow us to sort of generate data on the ways parenting activities and strategies are both stratified and stratifying. For example, unequal access to information and unequal ability to pay for private tuition and after-school activities. So what we have done during our periods of fieldwork is interviews with mothers and fathers, including parents of low, middle, and high incomes, In total, we have around 70 interviews if we merge the data in Singapore, Beijing, and Seoul. We have also tried to do observations whenever we have gotten access to such environments. We have done observations in home setting and educational settings, for example, homework support sessions, homeschooling sessions, parent-child workshop and tuition centers, and so on. And then we have done just an additional number of interviews with professionals such as teachers and social workers. I'm not sure how many of you are working ethnographically, but like an ethnographer is a little bit like a hoarder, that we try to source a lot of information, not always in a very structured way, but in whatever way we feel that can add some knowledge to the question we are researching. Then the fourth type of data, I just want to mention photo diaries with a smaller number of participants. This is where we were interrupted by COVID. But we have been hoping to ask parents to keep a diary and take photos of when, where, and how their daily routines relate to children's academic activities. And in that way, the participant can take an active part in the production of data. And we also hope that this kind of collaborative approach would also give us access to spaces and situations that otherwise might have been difficult for us to access. But like I said, we were interrupted, and to date we only managed to have a couple of photo diaries from Seoul. We are currently discussing whether we should switch to digital photo diaries that we can make remotely with some of our respondents, or if we're going to wait a bit longer. We haven't actually decided yet, so we will see. Yes, let's see. So let's talk a little bit about parenting styles and the idea of intensive parenting. So parents' increased involvement in their children's academic achievement is usually understood as a manifestation of the cultural norm known as intensive parenting, according to which parents are expected to invest substantial time as well as emotional and financial resources in their children's upbringing. In that sense, intensive parenting styles imply a future-oriented understanding of children's lives by the emphasis on the development of competitive individuals, as well as parents' responsibility to ensure that particular development. So in that context, parents are expected to raise their children to be agile and flexible individuals who can thrive in a rapidly changing world. Several studies have linked intensive parenting to the reproduction and increase of socioeconomic stratification, as well as gender inequality, since the increased burden of care included in the norm of intensive parenting to a great extent falls on mothers. This is certainly also the case in our study. Everything we see sort of confirms the reproduction of socioeconomic and gender inequalities. But while parents' involvement in education is both gendered and stratified, what have struck us is that the idea that children are vulnerable to risks and that responsible parenthood is tied to the task of reducing those risks appears widely shared regardless of social class background or gender. During our fieldwork, parents across class backgrounds expressed deep concern for the children's schooling. While the engagement in children's education is not exclusive to middle and upper middle classes, the means to do so, of course, remains sharply unequal. The imperative that parents play a supporting role in the children's educational development is intimately linked to middle class and affluent class status, precisely because it requires a certain economic, academic, and social capital. The importance of an education was certainly emphasized by low-income parents that we have interviewed, and in many cases even more so than by the middle and upper middle classes we encountered. But their concerns differed in a number of ways. First, the low-income parents lacked the resources, of course, to enroll children in private tuition centers, and they lacked the self-confidence and know-how to coach the child through homework and in preparation for exams. Secondly, low-income parents expressed more confidence and reliance on the teachers than did middle and upper middle class parents. And thirdly, low-income parents' expectations of their children's performance were significantly lower. But even so, given their very limited resources, the educational work performed by low-income parents was sometimes equally emotionally absorbing and time-consuming. So while the middle and upper middle class parents we have interviewed perceived university education, for example, as a given, the low-income parents rarely spoke about this as a given. They did stress the importance of education, but more in the sense of getting by and pulling through. I have two quotes here on this slide that I think can sort of illustrate these different conceptualization of education and childhood. So the first quote is by a low-income mother that she shared that her daughter likes dancing, and she encourages her to cultivate her passion to dance, but it will always come second to school. So I can just read this quote. "If dancing is your passion, go for it. I said to my daughter, just do whatever you want, but I have to send you to school because education is the main thing in Singapore. You need an education," I said, "because education is more important than anything else. Dancing is a passion. You can go and dance anything, but education comes first. If you don't have an education, you can't go to work." Whereas the middle and upper middle class parents, on the other hand, tended to look beyond formal education. And here I have one example. It's a couple, an upper middle class couple with 3 children. Both the mother and the father, they had university degrees from overseas, and they had successful professional careers. And when we discussed their thoughts on children's education, they both maintain that social skills and a flexible mindset is more important than a formal education. So here is a quote by the dad, who said that, like, "You don't even know, right? By the time when our kids are old enough, is a university degree even relevant? I don't know. I'm not sure whether worrying about all this now is going to pay out in the future. I would much rather have the children enjoy school and have friends. Being able to make friends is a very important skill." He also continued later on in the interview on reflecting on what types of skills that might be valuable in the future economy. I quote again, "I think what is important is really for them, the children, to be able to explore and try many things, to be able to be very nimble so that in future they can go for their future further studies. The key to do it is that they can graduate. They can spot opportunities, they can seize the right opportunities when they're out there working, and not just become a doctor or a lawyer." This kind of self-assurance about coaching children, as well as access to information and social networks, stands in stark contrast to the interviews we have done with the low-income parents, like this mother here that I quoted. So there is no doubt that conceptions and practices around children's education are stratified and linked to different forms of power relations. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Annette Laro's classic study, Unequal Childhoods, Class, Race, and Family Life, on social class and parenting in American families, where she distinguished 2 essentially different approaches to child rearing. And the approach that Laro terms concerted cultivation is associated with middle-class parents' ambitions to sort of meticulously organize and structure the children's activities, while working class parents appear to favor the accomplishment of what she calls natural growth, an approach characterized by the absence of adult organized activities and a clear boundary between adults and children. But what we sort of found when we are discussing our data in this present study is that actually it's not so easy to separate these two parenting styles. They seem to be more complexly entangled rather than essentially two different parenting styles. The middle class parents that we have interviewed often emphasized creativity and natural exposure in learning activities. And while these sort of natural exposure activities were usually framed as relatively unstructured and radically different from organized cramming, they were also in fact carefully planned and regulated, and often with hidden educational intentions to increase the child's versatility and learning potential. Lower income parents that we interviewed by contrast were much less concerned with creativity and natural exposure. And as pointed out before, they expressed much less confidence in regarding the children's educational needs and learning processes, and rely a lot on the teachers at school. I think important to mention is that when we talk about parents' concern for the children's education and future, it's quite clear to us that it's not only about results and grades. It was also quite a lot about their child's resilience and emotional well-being. And this double concern was particularly articulated among middle class and upper middle class parents. They worried that their children would fall behind if learning gaps in early childhood was not corrected in time, and that the failure to get good grades in school could have a lifelong negative impact on the child's self-confidence. So not only on the child's future careers, but also on their actual well-being. There are actually other researchers that have used Gregory Bateson's concept of double bind to theorize such conflicting ideas about appropriate forms of parenthood and childhood among middle-class parents, and that these contradictory demands give rise to some sort of deadlock where parents feel powerless and uncertain about which course of action to follow, how to sort of combine the expectations and the pressure on securing good grades and a future, and also on well-being. But what we also have seen in our during our fieldwork is that there are two desires that are sort of conflicting in one sense, but they are not so radically opposed as one might think. They are in fact intimately entangled and in some ways also reconciled by the parents in their way of approaching children's education. The ways in which these sort of then seemingly opposite desires are reconciled was particularly evident with regard to parents' efforts in raising resilient, flexible, self-motivated, and self-disciplined children. And in this process, parents seem to try to encourage children to forge a specific type of psychological disposition that would make them enjoy learning, so that they can, in that way, reconcile academic achievements and emotional well-being. That if you enjoy learning, you will also feel well and you will learn. And we have been sort of labeling this as an ambition to cultivate, an ambition among parents to cultivate a learning and growth mentality as opposed to the conventional cramming. And there are different ways in which you can try to do this. Play-based learning is one very popular way of trying to reconcile learning and well-being and to have a positive attitude to learning. Other ways that parents try to help the children to become both resilient and self-motivated was a different way of establishing spatial and temporal routines. So I will show you some examples here. So this is from my fieldwork. This is a Singaporean middle-class mother who emphasized in an interview that her primary goal was to teach her children to be self-sufficient and self-disciplined in managing their schoolwork. Her children had a packed schedule with organized activities nearly every day, most of which were actually non-academic. It included piano, rock climbing, scouts, gymnastics, swimming, artistic diving, and Chinese. In addition to all these organized activities, the kids also have to keep up with their homework, and to help her children to manage their time, to make sure that they also have time for the homework. The mother created very detailed spreadsheets to track their activities and their routines. And I was allowed to take pictures of some of these spreadsheets that were in their home. And she told me, I quote here from the interview, at the beginning of the year, I always do up a daily schedule for them, which, factoring in all these daily activities that they have, and which are the days that they can possibly have a bit more time to work on these revisions, homework revisions. So you can see here that one set of spreadsheet provided an overview of the month, including exams, classes, and special events. Another set of spreadsheet provide a very detailed schedule of the children's daily program from Monday to Sunday, organized in 15 minutes time slots. And that schedule also includes time to get ready for school in the morning, travel to and from school, school hours, lunch, relaxation time, piano study time, traveling to extracurricular activities, and so forth, ending with bedtime. There was also various ways in managing space to try to foster routines, and the same mother that I quoted on the earlier slide showed me also what she called their homework corner, and it's basically a desk tray placed on a side table in the kitchen, where the children are supposed to put their homework when they come home from school, and it's there visible, and they are supposed to do their homework and then put it back in the tray, and then later on put it in the bag. So that was also an attempt about creating good study habits and routines, and encourage the children to be self-motivated and responsible. So the mother that I quoted here, she hoped that the spreadsheets, as well as organizing space in various ways, would help the children to manage the time and take own responsibility for their activities. And in the interview, she positioned herself in opposition to other parents who, what she said, overparent their children. But even though she didn't like to overparent children, she felt compelled to monitor and motivate her children to a certain degree, despite her efforts in creating all these pedagogical spreadsheets. And later on in the interview, she also expressed frustration when the intended outcome of the spreadsheets failed, like in the quote we see here. I kind of have to do it to monitor and motivate the children, but I feel that I shouldn't have to do it because it's not me. And at your age, referring to her children's age, you should take responsibility. So I'm quite conflicted. I don't know. Quite conflicted because I feel that you should take your own responsibility. But I kind of also understand that you are a boy and you're 11 years old and you probably can't really see the relevance of this. So usually it gets a bit ugly around this time and we all scream at each other because I feel like we already have a schedule and an exam schedule. I already did up a beautiful schedule for you. All you have to do is to follow it and still you don't. I think this quote also illustrates that teaching children to be self-motivated and complete their tasks independently was often and paradoxically in a way labor-intensive and emotionally absorbing. And mothers in particular invested considerable time and energy and emotion in planning and monitoring the children's learning. So, some concluding remarks also before we have a discussion. So important, I think, is to, of course, stress that the increasing concern for children's emotional and psychological well-being is by no means something that is invented or driven single-handedly by parents. On the other hand, I mean, the importance of child emotional and psychological health is nowadays emphasized at multiple levels, including by ministries of education, experts, and the media. And with a number of reports on anxiety and stress among students on the rise, there has been a shift of attention in education policy in Korea, Singapore, as well as in China. So measures are now taken to reduce the emphasis on exam and grades, while promoting a more holistic notion of learning. So for example, in an effort to promote happy education for all students, the Korean Ministry of Education recently revised the national curriculum to nurture a creative and integrative learner. So under this motto, public schools in Korea are expected to enhance the happiness and well-being of students by giving them opportunities to explore dreams and aptitudes through participatory instructions, diverse learning experiences, and flexible curricula. And in the same vein, Singapore's Ministry of Education has identified a list of 21st century competencies essential to preparing children for the future, including self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and relationship management. The core values underpinning these competencies are respect, responsibility, resilience, integrity, care, and harmony. And while these core values and competencies appear to be a more holistic rather than a narrow exam-oriented framework, they remain a means to an end in a certain sense. They are promoted as crucial to helping students embody the desired outcomes of education, so that they are able to capitalize on the rich opportunities of the digital age. So while parents too appear to construct children's well-being and resilience as essential to educational achievement, we still maintain that it's simplistic to interpret their efforts as simply instrumental. Likewise, it is simplistic to assume that parents' sentiments of uncertainty in relation to children's education and future result causes a deadlock, as in paralyzed. On the contrary, what we have seen in our fieldwork is that parents are actively navigate, negotiate, and even reconcile the kind of complex and sometimes contradictory demands in raising their young children, and that this is also a moral as well as an emotional endeavor. It is something that we find is very important to convey. I can also just mention here the most recent publication from the project is found in the journal Families, Relationships and Societies, and it's a paper that is authored by myself, and it's only about Singapore. So if you are interested, you can go online. It's an open access paper. So it's available. Yes, I think I will stop there so we can have some time for discussions and comments, suggestions. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much, Kristina.
Should I stop sharing?
Yes, unless later on when
I will keep it.
anyone, wants to come back to the parts of the slides.
Yes.
Yes. So for Q&A, you can either type in to the chat, or let me try to have a view of everybody so you can just put up your hand to speak. Okay. Can't see everybody.
I would, I can take the opportunity just to say if there is anyone, I also forgot to, of course, to mention what we briefly spoke about, Ling Ling, that there are also changes in education policy in China where they try to curb the private tuition industry. So if there is anyone here who has any thoughts on these kind of changes in education policy, I'd be happy to hear more. We are specifically researching from the parental perspective, like I said, but I think there are many things going on when it comes to notions of education and learning and parenting and so on.
Yes, anyone want to start first?
I'm sorry, hello. My name is Lund from the Department School of Public Policy. Thank you for your talk. Oh, I think my mic may not be lowered.
It's okay. We can hear you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just in response to what you just said, I think that there was a point where South Korea had tried to do something pretty drastic too. It had banned, it had randomized students' assignment to secondary schools. And there was a.
Is it okay?
Sorry, there's a working from home clash here. So,
I am familiar with the problem. My
sorry.
husband working from home.
So sorry. I was just saying that, and they investigated the South Korean case and found that in South Korea, the amount of investments in shadow education continued to be high and actually increased as a result of that ban on choosing of secondary schools. Yeah, so when I think that the idea, the impression I got from that was that when you try to reduce the race for trying to get your children to prestigious places, the parents will find a different channel or different avenue, nevertheless, to try to maximize their children's opportunities. So I'm not sure if I feel optimistic about such very blunt instruments. And sorry again about the strange interjection.
Don't worry about it. Thank you. Yes, this is also my impression, both when I talk to parents and whenever I read about these kind of changes, that it can actually sort of increase shadow education, and people will always find ways if they feel that it is important for the future. One way or the other, they will find their ways. I think it's and that is the tricky part of it.
I cannot see the raising hands here. I don't know if there are other people who raised hands. So you could just speak up if you want to give a comment or raise a question. But I just want to say that Kristina, when we were talking about this curve in China, I think I was discussing this with some Chinese students, and they're saying that, well, so all the tuition centers are changing to educating the parents instead. So they will teach parents about math, and then parents will teach the children about math. When before that, it was a direct teaching from the tuition center to the children. Yeah, so it's probably adding on the burden of
oh my God,
children.
that's horrible.
Parents.
Poor parents.
Okay, yeah, Xiao Wan, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn, for letting me ask my question. So, hello, Kristina. Thank you for this fascinating talk. I am a second-year PhD student at the University of Oxford. So, my research is about fertility in China and women and gender relations, and also practice. So, I just have a question about these three countries you choose. So you also mentioned like parents' involvement in education is kind of like a moral endeavor. I'm wondering, like, are there any differences among these three countries, and also whether there are any, like, you know, this moral endeavor, is it based on like a cultural variance that is contextualized as well in different countries? So that's my first question. And secondly, I'm just wondering, like you mentioned, this parenting is also gendered and classed. So when it is gendered, it is because the difference of, you know, different parenting style between fathers and mothers, or it is also for, you know, the gender of the children, like for boys and girls. So that's just my general question. Thank you.
Great questions, thank you. Yes, I don't have a clear answer to none of your questions because we are struggling with them a little bit. First of all, you say you are researching fertility in China?
Yes, so basically I'm researching like women's fertility perceptions under the three-child policy now.
I just came to think that maybe you have come across my colleague's work, Lisa Eklund.
Yes, of course. Yes. And her work is fascinating as well. Yeah.
No, so first of all, the question about whether we can see any differences in these three settings, to be honest, we have been surprised by we have a lot of similarities. We have a lot of problems finding differences, but I'm sure when we go a bit deeper, we will be able to find some slight differences that can be both on related to policy level, but it can also be related to what you said about, for example, the gender of the children. So I have spoken to Lisa particularly about this because she says that she can see some differences in China with regard to parents' educational work in relation to the gender of the child. I have not been able to see any such patterns in my Singaporean data. But if there is anyone here who actually have such insights, please let me know, because I was discussing with Lisa particularly about that. But yes, I think we will have more problems finding differences, but I'm sure it probably requires some deeper analysis, and later on I can probably share more. But I'm thinking about fertility. This is also an interesting. I'm not dealing specifically with fertility. I'm not sure if Yuyan is still here, but I know that she has also, in a previous talk that I listened to last year, she also talked about that the burden on parents' educational care labor is a very crucial factor in understanding low fertility, and I can only agree. We see it in Singapore, and also my colleagues in China, in South Korea. So I think in order to understand fertility patterns, probably the parents' involvement in education needs to be understood as well. I'm looking forward to hear more about your research.
Thank you so much. Yes, as you mentioned, this new education policy in China, I think it's also related to the three-child policy, because the government thinks if we reduce parents, educational costs, maybe they would like to have more children. But on the other hand, I think parents' pressures for parenting and education are not decreasing, because this marketized choice is suspended, but they still want to, like, some of them can't afford like private tutors, like higher income families like you presented. So I think their struggles are still there, but definitely it needs like a more long-term observation. So, and thank you.
Thanks.
Is Yuyan still there?
I know she said that she had to leave. She might have to leave earlier. That's why I'm not sure if she...
Right. Okay, we also have Cameron Kane. Do you want to ask your question?
I'm sorry, it's a little bit noisy where I am right now, because I'm commuting right now.
Okay, so you can see on the chat box the question, Kristina.
Sorry, now I was in the chat. What did you say? Sorry.
The chat box. So to what extent, this is Cameron's question, to what extent do you think that children's self-motivations were merely extensions of their parents' desires? In other words, to what extent were they self-motivations?
Yeah, really. I don't know. But it's a really good question. And to be honest, as we have been going about this project, we really feel that we would have liked to also include children in this study, but that will have to be our next step. But I do think that it's not so clear whether it is the children's self-motivation or not. It's quite carefully crafted way of building self-motivation, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yes, anybody else would like to just speak up?
There seemed to be one more in the chat also, but
where?
One here, Jennifer.
Hi, is it okay if I jump in now?
Oh, yes, please.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much for your talk. Yeah, my name's Jennifer Estes. I'm an anthropologist in the Department of Sociology here at NUS. And I want to build on the discussion a bit about tutoring and shadow education. So I'm curious if you can talk in a bit more depth about parents' sort of relationship to tutoring, how they felt the investment in tutoring that related to academic subjects, right? What they felt about that and what they felt about the hours children are spending in this kind of formal instruction versus time for kids to be, doing their homework on their own. And I was also struck by the fact in that calendar, a lot of those activities were not school-related activities, but were things like you said, like diving and rock climbing. And so what that kind of balance and calculation was to invest a lot of time in other kinds of activities. And then second, I'm just curious if you had, I don't know if this was something you were looking into, but any sense of how much people were putting into investing in these activities in terms of like the economics of it? Like, are people taking on debt to fund this kind of extra educational things? Is this becoming a big financial burden for families? How much is just the sheer economic calculation kind of shaping parenting choices in that regard? Thanks.
Thank you so much. About the economic investment, I don't have the numbers here, but for all the interviews I did, I actually asked, so what's the total amount of money you actually put into this? And it's a lot for the middle and upper middle class. But I didn't hear anyone who was indebted. But on the other hand, I'm not sure they would share this information with me, to be honest. But there were also some parents who took charge of the coaching themselves by, for example, becoming stay-at-home mothers who are not stay-at-home mothers to do laundry and to cook, but to be stay-at-home mother to coach their children academically. And because it was also part of a sort of identity work, I think, to really go into this project of coaching your child. I also met mothers who are homeschooling their children, and that was a particularly striking, but they also did it because they were critical to the formal education system, of course. So you will find some variations. Some will really go for the you pay and you send your child, and some will be much more hands-on and involved, and also part of their sort of whole identity as a parent. Mothers, I would say. It's much more rarely that I didn't meet any. I met one father who was a stay-at-home dad, and he was very lonely, he said. He was also working remotely, so he was not really like a stay-at-home dad. But yeah, there are variations to it for sure. And what I could see is, though, that even though they understand, or you have these exams that you need to pass, the PSLE, you need to score well, but there is a trend, I think, where particularly middle-class parents, they try to find other more innovative ways of learning, and learning not to just memorize things, but learning a mindset that will equip them for the future. So I think that's why activities like, now there's also a lot of talk about physical activity will enhance your brain. I remember now I had interviewed one mother who sent her daughter for gymnastics, and she said that gymnastics is good because then she will have to train both sides of her brain coordination-wise, and this will also help her academically. So it's interesting.
Okay, that's another question. Sorry, I missed Agnes Lee's question. Are you here? Do you want to talk? Do you want to speak out?
Yeah, here. Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, actually, thanks for your presentation. I have two questions. I think the first one is quite similar with Xiaowen's question previously. At the beginning, you mentioned that the parenting style or the parenting practices is standard and stratified. So I'd like to know how many the participants or interviewees in your study are fathers, or have those mothers respondents mentioned about how their husbands or how their partners involved in their children's education? Yeah, and my second question is let me see. Yeah, my second question is about you also mentioned the parents have to balance their children's academic outcome and also their emotional well-being for reaching out their own abilities or their own habits. So I would like to know whether those respondents have mentioned some strategies how the parents to cope with their children's mental health. Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. First question, how many of the interviewees are fathers? I don't have the exact figure right now, but we do have interviewees who are fathers. Maybe on a total, our whole total data set, perhaps 1/3 are fathers. But to be honest, when you do ethnography, sometimes you need to just get the respondents that are interested in talking to you. And for sure, it's a lot easier to recruit mothers to talk about children's education, but we do have many fathers as well that we have interviewed. So it's not only the way the mothers talk about the father's involvement, it's also how the fathers talk about the involvement themselves. Then whether if I have found some strategies mentioned by parents to cope with the children's mental health. So the way they talk about first of all, I would say that parents are actually concerned about children's mental health. And I think the most important strategy is that they try to find these ways not to overburden them, to structure, that was one strategy, to structure the child's activities time-wise and space-wise, so that there will not be unnecessary stress around it. Other parents mentioned the need to have a good sleep at night. Then, of course, I would say that the most extreme strategies that I found were parents who decided to pull the children out of the formal education system and do homeschooling. Because many of them, of course, they were critical to the system itself, but they were also quite vocal about the fact that they feel that the formal school will have a negative impact on the children's mental health and well-being.
Thanks for answering. So maybe I would like to read your paper more carefully to find out some some details about from father's side. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And also I can say that me and my colleagues, we are currently having so we are working on different papers, and one is about fathers specifically. So keep an eye open in the coming year or two.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have time for one question. One last question. It's coming to 3 now. Anybody wants to ask or give any comments? No? Okay, so maybe just maybe I will ask the last question. You talk a lot about middle-class parents. I'm just wondering, what are the striking differences you see between the different class of parents? You did talk about it at the beginning, but is there any more other distinctions that you see?
So, well, apart from the obvious that there is a difference in in terms of resources, know-how, and ability to coach, and self-confidence in knowing what is good for your child. Those are the very obvious. But I think in terms what have struck me so far is, I mentioned it briefly, the way they talk about children's future, and the way that middle-class parents are much more concerned about these ideas of raising agile, flexible children who can spot opportunities and not just become a doctor or a lawyer, like the father said. That was very different compared to how the lower income were talking about the children's education. They didn't have these ideas of grabbing opportunities. There it was much more focused on if, and it was not taken for granted, but if the child can go through education, that is, then the goal is achieved. But for a middle-class parent, it's not achieved by just going through the education system. There are more things that needs to be achieved to consider it like that your goal is complete in giving your child the opportunities that they need, or the foundation that they are perceived to need for the future.
Yeah, so it will be interesting to look at how the changes in education system, or emphasis that
yes, I think that is very interesting, these changes that's going on.
Right, and how it in fact would conflict or parallel different aspirations from middle class. Yes. Okay, great. So if there's any more questions that you want to ask Kristina, you can always, I'm sure you can find her email.
Yes, please get in touch. Just search for me at Lund University. You will find me.
Yes. So Okay, it's already time. I'd like to really thank our speaker, Kristina. Thank you very much for your very insightful presentation and discussion. And my thanks also to all of you here who have made time for the talk and for all your interesting questions and comments as well. So it's a Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. And well, in Singapore, it's really, our COVID situation is not getting any better. So all of us will have to really be careful and stay well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. And I hope to see you live sometime in the future.
Yeah, we hope to invite you back here. Yeah.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. And you have a good day, Kristina.
I will. Thank you.
We'll keep in touch. Thank you.